My guess is right now, if I invited 10 volunteers to come forward, and for each volunteer, I'm not going to do this, so don't get stressed out. But if all 10 volunteers were asked to give a definition of God, their definition of God, I would wager that everyone's definition would have the word love in it somewhere. That's a primary way in which we define God in our day and age. And so if that is one of our primary definitions of God, then we would do well to learn more about love, so then we could understand and learn more about God. There's lots of ways, lots of curriculum and foundations for understanding love. The one that we chose for this sermon series is The 5 Love Languages, a book written by Dr. Gary Chapman, in which he makes the point that there are different ways in which we can give love. There's different ways in which we receive love. Not everyone is the same, and so what we need to do is discover for ourselves what is the best way that we feel loved, and then share that with the people who are trying to show us love, and for us to figure out the love language of the people who we want to show love to, so that we can actually do that in ways that are meaningful to them. So there's a survey you can take, and just a show of hands. So who is words of affirmation? That's your primary love language. Anybody? Yeah, hold them up high. You're doing a great job. Good job. All right, acts of service. Who are acts of service? Okay, good. Quality time. Who are quality time folks? All right. Physical touch. Who are those folks? All right. And receiving gifts. Who are those folks? All right. So that's where we're going today, is we're focused on receiving gifts. And let me just set the record straight on behalf of these people. Because sometimes these people get a bad reputation. They get a reputation as someone who is materialistic or someone who's selfish. I mean, if you love me, buy me something, right? It's not exactly how it works for these folks. Rather, for these people, the gift is a sign of your value of them. The gift is a sign of how you feel about them. And the gift is just a physical representation. It's not as if for these folks a gift, the size of a gift is equal to the size of your love for them. Or it's not for these folks that the expense of the gift equals how sorry you are for the mistakes that you have made, right? It really is a physical representation of the way in which you feel. So for these folks, perhaps a flower, one single rose that you picked from the neighbor's yard and gave to them is more valuable to them than the $100 bouquet that was bought, delivered, arranged, and chosen by the local florist. I was talking to one of these people this week. We were having a conversation about this, and he said that when he receives gifts, that he doesn't really like receiving gift cards. He would much rather receive a gift that was less valuable, less expensive, smaller, maybe even, but it had some thought behind it. He said because gift cards to him feel like someone says, well, I don't really know what to get you, and I don't have any more time to think about it, so here's this. When he would much rather receive something that to him would express more thoughtfulness. Now, if you're a gift card giver, don't fret. Just understand for these people, when they say it's the thought that counts, they actually mean that. It's the thought that counts. Now, if your love language is not gift receiving, then you don't understand anything about this conversation that we're having right here. Because you think, tell me that you love me and get me the largest gift card you can so I can buy something that I would actually like, right? That's how we would think about it. Not so for these folks. It's the thought the intent behind the gift that shares your value for them. And that's what they receive when they receive your gift. In the scripture that Chris read, the first verse, verse 32, Jesus says, I have compassion for the crowd. And it's this compassion that compels the miracle of the feeding. I had compassion for the crowd, Jesus says. Now, if you look at the original Greek and that word compassion, what you would discover is that at the root of that word is a word that means inward, or your guts, or your bowels, the inside of you. You know, sometimes we think something, but sometimes we know it, right? It's that gut feeling. This is what the gospel writer was trying to convey, is that Jesus had this feeling deep seated. And so the gospel writer uses this word compassion. I've been reading an autobiography of John McCain, former senator from Arizona, and war hero and prisoner of war. And as I've been reading it, I'm at the point right now where he is describing his years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And it just makes me think time and time again that war is just awful. And the other day, I made the mistake of turning on the TV, and I was flipping channels, and I saw there was, so they were doing a show about children in refugee camps around the world. And I just watched a few minutes of it, and watched these children who are in refugee camps because of the war that's going on around where they would rather be and where their families have been driven out of, and just live in poverty and hopelessness and disease. And I just felt it in my gut. Yes, this is awful. War is awful. This week, a number of us, 5 of us from this congregation went to a training that the Chula Vista Police Department put on for active shooters in religious gatherings. And they were showing all these statistics about, different things that we have to think about today that are unimaginable. So that was Monday, one of the days this week, and I was running and listening to a news program, and the news program was talking about school shootings, and in particular the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, where I think it was 14 students and 3 staff were killed almost a year and a half ago now. And when they were talking about it, I was thinking, this is awful. And then the next part of the story, they shared that 2 of the students who survived that shooting in the last year have committed suicide. And one of the parents whose child was shot and killed in that shooting has committed suicide. And I was running, and I just stopped, and I stood right in the middle of the trail. I could just feel it in my gut. Then the next part of the story said that in 2018, there were 13 members of the U.S. Armed Forces who were killed while being deployed. And in 2018, there were 27 school children killed in schools. Do you realize that? Not that we want anyone, anywhere, deployed or otherwise, but more children killed in American schools in a year than service members deployed. Twice as many. Do you feel that in your gut? This is what the gospel writer was trying to convey when the gospel writer used compassion, that gut feeling. That this is the way that Jesus felt about these people. It was deep-seated. It was a love. It was a yearning. From the deep, he felt this. And this is not the only time that we see that this is the way Jesus or God values us. Right? Remember the story of Jesus and his friend Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Right? Jesus is off doing some healings and doing some ministry in different places, and he receives word that Lazarus, one of his best friends, is sick and is near death. And Jesus says, well, I'm doing this other thing. I'll come when I can. And he delays and he delays. 4 days later, he makes it back to Bethany, and he goes to see Lazarus, and what they say is, he's already died. He was dead. He's been dead for 4 days now. And you know what Jesus' response was? Jesus wept. Jesus wept. From the deep, he felt it. In Psalm 103, it says that the Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. There's more than one translation that substitutes compassion for merciful. And they're talking about this deep love that God has for creation. How many of you went to the Mother's Day brunch? And again, this year was a wonderful event. Stephanie Yoon was the speaker this year for the Mother's Day brunch. And I don't know if is she in the room? Oh, she's right over there. I'm going to talk about you. Is that okay? All right. Great. She gave me a thumbs up, I think. I can't really see her, but. So Stephanie, she was sharing her journey as a mom and a wife and a doctor and a woman of God. And one of the things that she said was, she was talking about the birth of her firstborn child. So he's born in the middle of the night. Then the next morning, she's laying in bed and she's holding him. And she can see out the window as dawn is breaking. And sort of, the world is lighting up. And here she is holding. And she said it was in that moment that she had a new and more profound understanding of God's love for her and us as she was holding her only son and imagining that God gave his only son. And she could never do that. But she knew at that moment exactly how it was that God felt about her in a way that she had never realized before. And so Jesus weeps at the loss of his friend. God is slow to anger, merciful, compassionate, abounding in steadfast love, that God would give God's only Son for you and I. That is the way that God values us, from this deep place. People who receive gifts as their love language, what they see and hear is the value that you have for them underneath those gifts. I know a child whose love language is gift receiving, and this child, growing up, her room was always full of stuff. And we, would have these like monumental clean out sessions. And it's like, you've got to get rid of some of this stuff. But she couldn't, because it was like this broken bracelet was given to her by this person. Right? It wasn't the things. But for every one of those things, it was about the person who had given it and the value that she received because of that gift. Now extrapolate all of that into our spiritual life. It's probably not a mistake on God's behalf. We had no idea that we would be doing this today, but this just so happened to be the day that Melissa was available to be here with us in all the worship services, sharing about this Stephen's ministry. What often happens to people amidst a time of crisis in life when they've lost the loved one, or they've lost the job, or they've lost whatever in life. What too often happens to too many people is they begin living alone, and they begin questioning their value of themselves. They begin questioning other people's values of them, and worse, they begin questioning God's value of them. And this ministry is an opportunity for us to help remind people at the worst and lowest time in their life how God values them. And every time we leave this campus and we go out into the world, we have the opportunity to share with people just how God values them. And just as we want our loved ones to know that we value them by giving them gifts, there are all kinds of gifts in our spiritual life that we might share with other people that would help them understand just how much God values them. For God gave his only Son as a gift to the world for you and I, that we might have eternal life. That's how much God values us. In the name of the Father, and the Son,